Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the Miami Dolphins 2024 NFL draft class based on data. So we're going to look at production, athleticism, and other statistical factors to determine how well the Dolphins did in this particular draft class. If you want to learn more about my grading system and about all those different kinds of stuff in terms of metrics and data, you can go to my top 50 prospects video. The link is in the description for that. I go over all the correlations. I go over everything that makes this data meaningful and significant to you guys. But with all this stuff out of the way, let's get to the needs. So these are the needs for the Miami Dolphins. And also stay tuned until the end of the video where I reveal the overall grade for the Miami Dolphins draft class. But this is the needs. Based on data, this is how well the Dolphins have been performing. So NFL positional AV deals with how well they've been performing from a per year basis up to this point, how they actually have been performing, and then data grade or EAV is on the right hand side. So the data grade is essentially how they tested pre-draft, and then the AV grade or how they're actually performing is on the left hand side. Okay, and then of course you have age. Any prospect over 30 years old is a little bit of a concern based on their age. You're kind of hoping to maybe get a replacement for them, but this is how they test it in terms of that. Now, in terms of needs, these are all the needs that the Miami Dolphins have at this point. Offensively speaking, in terms of pre-draft, okay, they definitely needed some wide receiver help. The reason why is one, Braxton Berrios is not the best wide receiver ever in terms of his overall data profile. Again, he's not exactly like a number one wide receiver. He's more of a, rotational, solid guy. But again, they could do better at that position. So that's one reason why that's such a need. And then the second reason is because Tyreek Hill is definitely a little bit older as a prospect. So anytime a wide receiver starts to get pretty old, and you have two of them that are a little bit older, and Barrios and Hill, you should start looking at adding another wide receiver to the group that can kind of make it a little younger. So that's the main reason why that's such a need. Then, of course, you get to the tight end position is another area of need, and then offensive line as well. So they do need those needs in terms of long-term outcomes for them. I think that would help them out a lot if they got younger at those different positions. Okay. Then, of course, you get to the defensive side of the football. The biggest needs are defensive tackle. Christian Wilkins leaving definitely left a big hole there that hasn't really been filled yet. Then, of course, you get to the cornerback position that needs some help. Linebacker as well, and safety would be another area. Edge is it's pretty solid at edge overall for them, but this is kind of how they tested in terms of the defensive side of the football. Starting with the first pick for them, pick 21 is Chop Robinson, edge out of Penn State. The data grade for him is 75.39 out of 100. His floor is 72.60. Balance grade is 73.99. And the pick AV is 90.73 out of 100. Now, the data grade is essentially pre-draft. So how well he tested, in terms of his overall data, his production, his athleticism, his strength of schedule, strength of team, physical metrics, all that stuff is compiled into that grade. And essentially the floor is what players who tested like him in the first round typically produced in terms of their average AV. So for first rounders like Chop Robinson, in that pick 21 to 30 range, you expect them to probably put up 72 percentile in terms of AV, which is kind of like a backup. Now, his balance grade is 73.99. That balances his ceiling with his floor. And the pick AV is what's expected from pick 21. So if you just randomly picked a player at the 21st pick, you would get a 90 percentile overall player. So this is the first pick for the Dolphins that really wasn't the best. I would give it a C. Why he tested so poorly is because of this. When you look at his production traits, 38 percentile in terms of solo tackle data, 34 percentile in terms of sacks, and 39 percentile in terms of TFL. He was just not a very productive edge rusher at Penn State based on his overall data. Now, when you look at his other data, forced fumbles and pass deflections, he was above average in terms of forced fumbles, but not so much in terms of pass deflections. When he gets his athleticism traits, this is by far the biggest reason why the Dolphins selected him was probably because of this, which is that he has 97 percentile speed, 94 percentile in terms of flexibility or change of direction ability. The short shell and three cone is the biggest component of the flexibility score, and then 80 percentile in terms of explosiveness. So he's a very good athlete at the position. He has pretty much all pro athleticism traits in many ways. It's just his production isn't matching that. And then on top of that, when you look at his adjusted production traits, adjusted production takes a look at things like age, MSA rating, and pass rating. Based on this area for him, and strength of schedule, strength of team, those are the biggest things that this is kind of talking about here. He didn't do so well, didn't do so hot. But I think what the Dolphins are betting on with Chop Robinson is that he's very athletic. He's still very young. So from that perspective, they think he might be able to be developed. There's still that chance for him to develop as a prospect, despite the fact he's not the most productive player. So this could either go two ways. Either the Dolphins develop him into a really good starting edge rusher with really great athleticism traits, or he becomes the next Barkevius Mingo, a prospect that, was very athletic, but when you look at his overall data, it wasn't the best in terms of production, and then just kind of fizzled out in the NFL. So those are the two paths for you. Now, do I think this was a good pick or not? I mean, I already gave the pick a C. I think there would have been better prospects taken at that spot to get the best value for a player like this. But overall, not a terrible pick. I do see where they're trying to go with it. It is a pick that could be successful, but it is definitely a very riskier pick than what you would want to take here. Then, of course, you get to pick 55 and Patrick Paul, offensive tackle out of Houston. His data grade is 83.06. His floor is 78.41. His balance grade is 80.73 with a pick AV of 87.64 out of 100. Overall pick grade would be a B. Taking a look at his data, he had a 70 percentile explosion score, 85 percentile in terms of speed, and 83.26 in terms of flexibility for his size. These are good numbers to have at the tackle position. It puts him within the Pro Bowl starter average area in many ways based on his traits. And because of that, on top of his length and his overall size, I think he could eventually become a long-term starter for the Dolphins. So this was actually a pretty decent pick in day 2 of the draft. Then, of course, we get to pick 120 and Jalen Wright, running back out of Tennessee. His data grade was 82.27 out of 100. His floor is 58.62. Balance grade is 70.45. With a pick AV of 54.05 out of 100. Overall pick grade would be a B. Based on his market share production traits, not the most productive player, 54 percentile in terms of total offensive market share data, but he did have good efficiency scores. So he had a 90 plus percentile in terms of yards per touch score. He had a really good TD percentage as well, but his yards per reception was below average, which is kind of odd. But overall, good all around efficiency scores for him. And then when you look at athleticism traits, he is 90 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 93 percentile in terms of speed, which are really good marks for him to hit. And then when you get to adjusted production traits, he's within line of the starter averages because of his age. So even though Jalen Wright isn't the most productive running back, he does have great athleticism traits, if not elite athleticism traits, and he has the right age that you're looking for to maybe develop long term. So he's one of those prospects that does need development, but I think with the Miami Dolphins, they would get the most out of him. They want to get more speed on the football field, and I think he would definitely add that element to them. Do I think he's better than Arcane? I would say no. Arcane did have a better overall profile coming out, so Jalen Wright will definitely have his work cut out for him in terms of making the roster and really making an impact here. But overall, it's not a bad pick. It's just that he probably would have been better off going to another team that actually has like an open running back spot to actually get those reps as a starter. So we'll see what happens with him. But again, not a bad pick, but definitely not the best pick because he does need some development time in terms of developing his overall game, which wasn't there on full display at Tennessee. Then, of course, we get to pick 158 at with Muhammad Kamara, edge out of Colorado State. He had a 75.39 data grade, 54.80 in terms of his floor, and 67.35 in terms of his balance grade with a pick AV of 41.31 out of 100. His overall pick grade would be a C. Now, Kamara has good production traits, 93 percentile in terms of sack data, 84 percentile in terms of TFL. His other market share data, 70 percentile in terms of forced fumble market share, 46 percentile in terms of pass deflections. And then when you look at athleticism traits, 92 percentile in terms of speed for his size. So Really good speed, really good sack numbers, but the issue comes down to his adjusted production traits. When you adjust for his level of competition that he faced at Colorado State and for his age, he doesn't test as well. So he's not really near the starter averages because of that, but there's just a lot of upside with him. So despite the fact that he didn't test that well in terms of his MSA rating and his pass rating, I think that because of his production and his athleticism being what they are, this could be a really good developmental, if not starting, edge rusher long term. So, despite the fact that he has the issues in terms of his level of competition, he could be somebody that long term might turn into something really special. So, I'm excited to see what happens with him on this roster. It's pretty loaded. I think he will have to fight to get a spot here, but if he does get a spot, I'm excited to see what happens with him long term. Then, of course, we get to pick 184 and Malik Washington, wide receiver out of Virginia. His data grade is 81.74 out of 100. His floor is 29.03. Balance grade is 59.38 with a pick AV of 38.61. Overall pick grade would be a B. Taking a look at his market share production traits, he had 95 percentile in terms of receiving market share, 98 percentile in terms of total offensive market share, and 90 percentile in terms of touchdown market share. Fantastic production numbers for him overall here. When you look at his efficiency scores, not as much. So his yards per reception and TD percentage were not exactly where you want it to be in terms of a long-term standpoint. But his athleticism traits are good. 94 percentile in terms of explosiveness, 75 percentile in terms of speed. And when you get to adjusted production traits, he's closer to the starter averages than an All-Pro or Pro Bowl player. But overall, I like Malik Washington. I think he adds a decent impact here for them. Do I think he's going to become a starter the first year? No. I think he might take some time to kind of develop and kind of fill in that spot. But I am excited to see what happens with him long term because this could be a spot where he'll eventually emerge as a starter at some point. So really excited about him to kind of see what happens with him. But this is not the best landing spot because of the competition he's going to face, but still, it's one where because of the wide receiver need that I brought up at the very beginning of this video, he could potentially fall into like maybe the slot position or some other position like that in those three wide receiver sets. And it would not surprise me if at some point this season you see Malik Washington with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in those three wide receiver sets because he is a very versatile wide receiver. Then, of course, we get to pick 198 and Patrick McMorris, safety out of California. His data grade is 75.39 out of 100. His floor is 72.60 with a balance grade of 73.99. Overall pick AV would be 90.73. And overall pick grade would be a C. Taking a look at his data here, he had a 85.66 percentile solo tackle score, 74.90 in terms of his interception data, and 83.61 in terms of pass deflection data. Taking a look at his other scores in terms of athleticism traits, 6 percentile in terms of explosiveness, speed was 40 percentile, 37 percentile in terms of flexibility or change of direction skills. Not the best athlete for him, so that is a concern. And then when you get to adjusted production traits, you really get adjusted production. Age is also an area that is not that bad, but his athleticism is concerning for him. Then, of course, we get to pick 241 and Taj Washington, wide receiver out of USC. He had a data grade of 54.15. Floor is 21.83. Balance grade is 37. Pick AV is 22.01 with an overall pick grade of an F. Taking a look at his production traits, he had good total offensive market share, but below average touchdown data and average receiving market share. So not the most productive player. When you look at his efficiency scores, really good in terms of his yards per reception, but TD percentage was below average. And then when you look at athleticism traits, he had below average in every single metric, but he did have slightly below average flexibility testing. And then when you get to his adjusted production traits, he does hit closer to, say, the starter averages when you adjust for his level of competition. So not the most athletic wide receiver, so that is a little bit of a concern, but there could be something here with Washington if he develops long term. Then, of course, we get to the final grade for them. I would give them a C. Did they meet all the roster needs? I would say yes and no. Did they draft good prospects? I would say yes and no. Did they draft prospects that have the potential to outperform their draft status? I would say yes and no. The Dolphins added a lot of depth at the edge and wide receiver position. However, they still have a lot of issues to address long term. So they didn't really get any defensive tackle help, which is something that I identified as a need for them. But they did do some digging in terms of wide receiver and edge. So I'm excited to see what happens this year with them. Overall, I think they still have some holes on the roster, which I'm going to do some future videos on, but not a bad draft by any stretch of the imagination. Of course, Chop Robinson may have been overdrafted. He was one of the prospects that, based on his data, probably shouldn't have went in the first round. But overall, not a terrible class. I think there are some players that are going to be able to step in and become starters and become really good, significant contributors long term. So overall, thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn. You can check out my other work at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also, check out my X, formerly known as Twitter account, at Jimmetrics. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.